So welcome to this lesson where we're going to take a look at developing the sign-in page. So the sign-in page is, again, very simple. All we're doing is we're using the form elements from the EWD UI. We're going to have to center this form up, which can be a little bit tricky, but you'll see how I'm going to do that. And then we just have a header 1 right here and an anchor. And we don't need to bother with the header and so forth, so I can just start to develop this page. So as I'm developing the page, don't forget I'm using SCSS, so make sure that within the sign-in directory you're targeting the SCSS file in the terminal, and then what you need to do is say, okay, well, convert it to CSS whenever I save a new change. Now don't forget there is a lesson that I provided again for learning how to do all of that with SCSS. So please make sure you've watched that so then you're on board with what we're doing here. So now what I want to do is start to develop the sign-in page. So you can see here I've got the PHP file open, and I've also got that file open in the browser, and I also have the SCSS file, which is what we'll move on to next. But first what we need to do is put in the markup. So with the body element, what I want to do is put on an ID attribute that says sign in, and then what I'm going to do is take a look at creating a div element with the ID of login. So what this will be is the main development that wraps around this small piece of content right here and is aligned vertically in the center and also horizontally in the center as well. Then also we're going to have the header 1 right at the top that just says sign in. Then also we're going to have the input fields. Now with the input fields, and if you are unfamiliar with this UI, what you have is a div element, and that wraps around a span, and the span is effectively the icon that we have right here, and inside of the span we have some text that is the glyph. Then also we have the input as well, and that's all wrapped up inside of a div, and then we have the anchor at the bottom. So first of all I'm just going to create the div element with the class UI underscore form. Then we have the span, which is going to be effectively the yellow circle right here, and then inside of that we're going to have some text. As you can see, this is the same inside of Photoshop. This is text right here that is the Liger font, and if you're ever unsure about what specific character gives you that glyph or symbol, then all you need to do is just copy it out from Photoshop and paste it into your text editor, and you can see here the dot generates that little person gif. Then we have the input right now, and that's basically it. And then all I need to do is simply copy this out and paste it below. And for this one, it's a lowercase w to get the lock icon. So now that we've done that, let's put in the anchor. It's going to be a dummy link, and it's just going to say login for the text. So save that, go ahead and refresh the browser, and now let's take a look at the SCSS file. So the very first thing that we need to do is gain access to all of those variables and mixins that are in our import.scss file. So we're going to import that SCSS file, and you do it pretty much exactly the same way as a CSS file import to another CSS file. So we say at import, and then what we do is we go up a directory, don't forget, and so now we're in the admin directory, and then we can go find the import.scss file. Now you don't need to put the file extension in, you just leave it as the file name and then end with a semicolon. So now we have access to all those variables, mixins, and also default styling as well. The next thing we need to do is take a look at the actual body element and get that background color changed. So I'm just going to say ID sign in, and I'm going to change the background color to yellow, and then just go ahead and save it and hit refresh. So now we have the background color in there. The next thing that I want to do is take a look at the login div. So let's target that ID login. And what we need to do with the main div is center this up horizontally and vertically as well. So I'm going to set the position to absolute, and there's a very good reason for this. With position absolute, you can use the top left, bottom, and right CSS properties. Now they're not the margin, but they are to do with positioning. Now we're also going to need the margin as well, and I'll explain in just a second. But what I want to do is set the top to 50%, and I also want to set the left to 50% as well. Then after that, I want to set the width and the height. Now we need to know the width and the height. It's very, very important. So I'm going to set those dimensions. So the width is 240 pixels and the height is 180 pixels. Now, if we look at this, when you transform or position something, effectively you're moving it, transforming it in the top left. That's the origin. However, what we need to do is move that origin into the center of the div. So what we need to do is use the negative margin. So when you set the negative left margin, it brings that origin in horizontally. Then we need to bring in the negative margin for the top. So then it brings the origin down. So we get it exactly in the center of the div. So that's what we're doing here. And that's why I've set the width and the height. So I'm going to say the negative margin left is going to be 120 pixels. Again, it's half the width for the left, and the margin top is going to be, again, the negative value of half the height. So that's 90 pixels. And then once you do that, go ahead and save it and just hit refresh. And now you'll notice this is centered up perfectly. Now, it may not look like it right now because obviously we haven't got the child elements inside of there spaced correctly. So that's what we're going to focus on next. So let's go ahead and take a look at, first of all, the header 1. So very quickly, when you're dealing with text inside of Photoshop, I know that sometimes the actual value that you get in Photoshop is not the correct value when you actually take it over to CSS. And so the way that you actually solve that problem is drop down the Photoshop menu, go to Preferences, and then you want to take a look at Units and Rulers. And what you can do is change the type to pixels. Now don't change it to points or millimeters because they just don't translate very well into CSS. Even if you use their same measurement value, such as points, it still doesn't look right. So change it to pixels, and when you do that, you can then select your text and get the actual pixel value of your text, just like so. So this is 24 pixels right here, and that translates into CSS a lot nicer. So now that we've gone ahead and taken a look at that quick preference, what we want to do is first of all target that ID login, and then we want to target the header 1. So once we've done that, what we want to do is get rid of any default styling. So we want to get rid of the padding, and then also want to take a look at the margin as well. So with the margin, we're going to set the top to 5 pixels, then we're going to set the right to 0, we don't need any on the right or the left, but the bottom we're going to set to 15 pixels. Now again, I've sort of finessed this and obviously played around with it a little bit, and then 0 on the left. And by the way, there is a 15 pixel spacing between pretty much all of these elements right here. So again, that applies to the inputs as well. But we'll move on to those in just a second. Now also, you can have different line heights. Certain browsers, you know, play around with the line heights and so forth. So set the line height to 100%. That way you'll save yourself a massive headache. And then also we're going to change the font size, as you know, change it over to the pixel measurements, and that way you will be more accurate from Photoshop into your CSS. So we have font size 24 pixels. Then also we want the font weight, because again, by default the browser likes to make this nice and bold. I'm going to set it to 200. That means that it's nice and light. Then also I'm going to set the text alignment in the center. So go ahead and save that, hit refresh, and there we go. Our header 1 is now looking much nicer. So the next thing that I want to do is take a look at this input right here, but mainly the div that wraps around it. And what I want to do is add a class onto here, which is going to be MT, which stands for margin top, because we need to move this down from this input, because otherwise it just doesn't look right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to target that class inside of the ID login, just like so, because I may want to use that class in other instances throughout the project, and I don't really want to just set this one for all. So I'm just going to say login MT, and then I'm going to set the margin top to 15 pixels. And then what we can do is take a look at styling the anchor. So very quickly, we need to edit our generic styling. And so if we want to edit the generic styling, we need to change the import.scss file. And what I want to do is get rid of any text decoration that is on an anchor. I don't actually want to style the anchor any further. I just want to get rid of that text decoration on there, because none of our anchors have any text decoration throughout the entire front end. So what I'm going to do is take a look at that import.scss file, and let's just open that guy up. And then inside of there, what I want to do is say, okay, well, with the anchor, I want to set the text decoration to none. And go ahead and save that, close it out, and now we can focus again on our styling. So I'm just going to target the ID login, and then I'm going to target the anchor that resides inside of there. Now this anchor needs to have some mass, so I'm just going to say display as a block level element. Then also I'm going to tell it to float over to the right, because obviously the button needs to line up on the right edge. Then also what I want to do is set a bit of the padding. So the padding for the top and the bottom is going to be 0, but it's going to be 20 pixels for the left and the right. And if you take a look at this, you'll notice that again it's sort of budged in a little bit. So that's why I've set the left and the right. But what about the height? Surely you need some padding on there. Well, no, you don't. What you need to do is set the line height, and that way you can align the text vertically in the center. So what I'm going to do is say line height 35 pixels, and that way it will align it directly in the center vertically. Then also what I want to do is take a look at the background color. So I can say background, and then I can set that to white. Then also we have the font size, which is going to be 15 pixels. Then we have the color of the font. So the color is going to be text 1, which is going to be the brown text color. Then also we have the text alignment. Obviously we want that horizontally in the center, so we say text align center. And then also we have some mixins to put in here. So we have the mixin for the border radius, don't forget, with the import.scss, so I don't have to keep repeating myself with all the border radius CSS properties. So I can say @include border radius with a capital R. And we don't want to set this to a percentage, because in some browsers it will give us that sort of capsule effect that we have right here, where it's just rounded off at the end. But in WebKit based browsers such as Google Chrome and Safari, it'll actually turn it into a giant oval because it's oblong, it's not a perfect square. So we don't want that, so just set it to a ridiculously large pixel value, so for example 30 pixels, and that way you'll get the capsule effect. Then also I'm going to say @include, and we're going to say transition. So we have the transition CSS properties being printed out, but what is the value for those transition properties? Well, it's going to be all and 0.3 seconds. So transition all available CSS properties in 300 milliseconds. That's what it's saying right there. So what that will do is allow me to animate the hover state. So I'm just going to copy this selector right now and paste it below. And we're going to take a look at the hover state, and all we want to do is just change the color scheme a little bit. So the background color can be dark yellow, and the font color can be text 2, which is the white text color. So I'm just going to save that and just hit refresh. And you'll notice now that we have this, but it's not positioned correctly because we need to set some of the margins right here. So I'm just going to set the margin top to 15 pixels, and that way it will budget down a little bit. So now we have this really nice button, everything's centered up really nicely, and again you can just shrink the window and you can see how this is all staying exactly in the center. And because it's so small, 240 pixels, you don't really have to worry about mobile devices because it's that small anyway. And it's again directing the user's attention directly in the center, which is fine. I know that the top left is the main focal point, but however in this instance we don't really have to worry about it because it's so clean, it's so simple, there's not a lot of information for the user to digest, so just keep it nice, clean and simple. So thank you for watching this lesson, and join me in the next lesson where we'll develop the header.